You can see here how large the part is. Like I'll grab a printed one so you can see how big it is. Oh, this may, like, relative to my hand, it's really the size of my hand. What is it, about 140 by about 120, something like that in size. You can see the actual speed, the print speed directly out of the 0.3mm tip is not super fast. But as soon as you see it do some cornering, where there's a lot of acceleration involved, you see it really take off. Now the print speed is actually obviously limited by the 0.3mm tip, but let's see if we can get a better angle. The Cartesians just spends way too much time accelerating. Watch it do the fill here. That business of the acceleration backwards and forwards, the Cartesians are way too slow, whereas the Deltas are all very, very fast. And that's what I'm aiming to achieve with the CoreXY, somewhere closer to the Delta's performance. The best comparison I've come up with is driving through the mountains. If you can imagine not having to slow down for corners, then you start seeing what a Delta is good at, because it scarcely has to decelerate and accelerate. It spends very little time, or wastes very little time, slowing down and accelerating. Whereas we have a look at a Cartesian, I'll just zoom over there. Now the tip size is very similar. The actual throughput is very similar. But as soon as we get into the diagonal fill area, I'll just open the door. If you give the shakes, you've got things to deal with. It's just about to do an infill. You'll see that the ramp up speed, perhaps in the small area there, hopefully it'll do that. Well, there's the long length. The top speed's not much different between the two because the tips are very similar. So the melt speed of the tip is your, well, probably the primary speed limit. But the amount of time this thing spends accelerating, well, I've improved it a fair bit on what it was, because now I don't have, I had about 1.5 kilos travelling on the x-axis with all the bits and bobs on it. Now I've lightened it down to 1 feeder, and there's a significant amount of plastic in this feeder, so it's really the heavy bit is the motor. You can see how much time it spends accelerating on that zigzag. It's acceleration. Like, this is a vehicle that needs to slow down on corners a lot, whereas the Delta can basically go around the corners at full speed. That's probably the easiest comparison. Yeah, it's very hard to explain until you see it in action. You put two side by side doing the same print with the same tip and everything, same speeds, and the Cartesians are roughly, it's hard to compare them exactly, but they're roughly half as fast, depending on how much acceleration there is in the job. If you've got large parts where you don't spend much time accelerating, where you say do 100mm of travel in each movement, there's not much difference in the speed. But if you have parts where there's lots of backwards and forwards with infill or sharp cornering and that kind of thing, you end up with, you know, a lot of difference between the Delta and a Cartesian. So it's not exactly linear, they're not exactly twice the speed. On the very large parts, I found my Black Widow, provided the passes are very long and I've got a 1mm tip in there, I can put, well, the biggest amount I put through is just shy of 2 kilos in a 24-hour period. But that would have the potential of being in excess of 2 kilos in a 24-hour period if I didn't have so much like stop time. I could have made it more efficient to, you know, the amount of running time. But typical parts aren't that simple. Typical parts have got some complexity, like these. And even this is a fairly simple part. So per se, the actual throughput is always limited by the ability for the machine to accelerate and deliver the vectors, basically. When you always have motion involved, and when you have motion involved, it has to be delivered somehow. So primarily we have to avoid having mass that is moving. Now you can see here, you've got both the table and the X-carriage have a fair bit of mass moving. If we go have a look at the Delta, that head looks very big, but it's actually very light in weight. The motors for the motion are in the base and they are static. The motor for the feeder, being a Bowden arrangement, is static. So printers like the CR10, where you've got the Bowden feeder, it helps a lot not having that motor on the actual print head. The downside is with the Bowdens, you are restricted for things like compressible materials. Obviously that's determined more and more by the length and what sort of restrictions there are, as well as how compressible the material is you're trying to print. But Bowdens are limited. The trouble is I can't show you the acceleration because the camera doesn't actually show it. All you do is hear a rattle. There's a lot of movements in between the frames of what the camera takes. I can see them with my eye, but the camera seems to take, I don't know, every third movement. It can't seem to take the full amount of acceleration you can hear. Yeah, your ears will probably tell you more than your eyes do. This is a noisy machine. I think that's largely because of the fact it's a metal body. These are all like sheet metal, so everything's amplified nicely. So if you like listening to a printer, this is your machine. This is the machine for you. But no, the acceleration is the really hard thing to explain to people that are not used to acceleration. Yeah, I can see a lot more movement than the camera's picking up, so unfortunately I can't show you in the video. Well, I guess that's it. Enough waffle about this. Feel free to like, share, subscribe, ask a question, leave a comment. Bye for now.